Hello, my friends. It is Mrs. Bat, and today we are going to be solving one-step equations and literal equations that take one step to solve. And I'm not sure if you know what a literal equation is, but hopefully by the end of the lesson that you will feel really comfortable with that. So let's focus on those learning targets. I can solve one-step equations, including literal equations, correctly. I can show all steps correctly in writing when solving one-step equations. And so I'm really going to focus on this, showing your steps correctly. There are going to be times when you are going to be tempted to use mental math, and I am going to be pretty picky about you actually writing down your work, because that is setting up good work habits that are going to pay off when we get to the more complicated equations. All right, so we're going to write down our steps, even if you get mad at me and think you don't need to. All right. So once again, we are going to cover some vocabulary. So we have equation, solution, and solve, and also inverse operations are the key things we want to talk about up front. We've already talked about an equation, a math sentence where the values of two expressions are equal. And the key thing about an equation is that we have that equal sign in between our expressions. Now, when we talk about a solution, we're looking for a number. That's the value for the variable that makes the equation true. So what that means is, if we were to replace the variable with that number, we would get a correct calculation. So I'm just going to make something up really easy, like 2x plus 1 equals 5. And let's say the solution to that is x equals 2. And what that means is if I put a 2 in place of the x, 2 times 2 is 4, plus 1 equals 5. This would be the solution to that equation, because that's the one and only number that works there. When we say solve, that means we're going to use inverse operations to get the variable alone on one side of the equation. All right. Now, of course, what does that mean? Inverse operations. They're math operations that undo each other. So you may have learned them as fact families when you were younger. So let's make sure we understand what inverses are. So if we are adding, the inverse of add is subtract. So if you imagine that you have two pencils, I give you a pencil, and then I take away a pencil, it's basically you're back to where you started with, okay? If we have subtraction, the inverse of that is to add. All right, so addition and subtraction go together. Multiplication and division go together. If we say multiply, the inverse of that is divide. If I say divide, the inverse of that is multiply. And now I want to make sure I stress that we're talking about inverse. It's not opposite. Opposite is when numbers are different signs, like +2 and -2. Inverse means we're going to undo the operation. And here's two we're going to mention right now. We're not going to do these in today's lesson, but you're going to definitely have to understand this when you get to second semester. So if we square a number, remember that's using exponent of 2. The way to undo that is to unsquare, which we call square root. And if something is already being square rooted, we undo that by squaring. All right, the ones we're going to use mostly today are going to be add, subtract, multiply, and divide. All right, so we're going to do an example, and I have step-by-step directions for you here. Okay, so I want you to kind of follow these steps. So here's our equation, 2x equals 10. Now, my guess is you already know mentally what the correct number you could put in for x is. So I'm going to make you write down your steps, and I want to talk about the thinking steps that we go through, because these are going to pay off. Again, we're going to be solving very long and complicated equations before too long, and I want to build those healthy habits. So first thing we do is we're going to find that variable. All right, here it is. Now remember, the variable is the x. 2x together is a term. The 2 is the coefficient, the x is the variable, 2x is a term. So all alone, the x is the variable. So now I want you to think, what operation is happening to the variable? So again, x and a 2 smooshed together like that, that means multiplication. And so to undo that, the inverse of multiplication is division. All right, now, whatever we do to one side, you must do the same thing on both sides of the equal sign. So we're going to use division to undo this multiplication. And the way we do that in algebra is we use a fraction bar. So we have to divide this by 2, fraction bar, which means we have to come to the other side, also draw a fraction bar, and put a 2 under it. Okay? In algebra, we don't do this. All right, so fraction bar. Now, the 2's divide out. Now the x is all by itself. And then we bring down the equal sign. 10 divided by 2 is 5. And again, like I said, I'm pretty sure you figured that out before I showed you the work. But what we are expecting to see on your paper, this goes for every algebra teacher in the building, not just me, the fraction bar, the 2, and then the x equals 5. All right, now, let's look at this. Write the solution correctly. I'm going to highlight that. All right. We're not just going to say 5. We're going to say x equals 5. We need to have the variable. That's that thing number 1. We need to have the equal sign. That's thing number 2. And we need to have the number. That's thing number 3. All of this is required as part of your solution. You can't just write 5 and say you're done. X equals 5. Now, we're going to check our solution, which means we're going to plug that number back into the equation to see if it works. All right, so our original equation was 2x equals 10. We're going to put the 5 right there. 2 times 5 equals 10. 10 does, in fact, equal 10, so that means we have done this correctly, and our solution, x equals 5, is the correct thing, okay? Again, I will be very picky about writing solutions correctly. If you do not have the x, the equal sign, and the 5, you will not get full credit for any problem. Just like if you do not include the fraction bar and the 2 on both sides of the equal sign, you will not get full credit for that problem, okay? All right, let's take a look on the back side. That was an equation that had multiplication. We used division to solve it. All right, a couple more examples here. All right, so this equation has addition in it. So let's take a look. We're going to find that variable first. Here it is. Now what's different this time is the number is not directly touching the variable. It is separated by this addition sign. So that means what is happening to this variable is addition. And so in order to undo addition, we are going to use subtraction. All right, write down your work. Keep the equation balanced. You must do the same thing on both sides of the equal sign. Now, one thing I didn't mention before, what some students have found helpful to keep their equation balanced is to go ahead and draw a line here through the equal sign. And then that way, whatever you write on the left side of the equal sign, you have to write on the right side and use that line. So addition is happening. We have to write -2, -2. And I want to point out, we're going to write the symbol. I want to see that subtraction sign. Don't just put 2 and assume that everybody knows that you're going to subtract. You need to have that subtraction symbol. All right? So bring down the y. The 2 and then subtracted 2 cancel out. Bring down the equal sign. -10 minus 2 is -12. This is where I think maybe some of us are going to get in trouble. Okay? We've been doing a lot of integer subtraction practice, and a lot of students are still getting problems like this wrong. So this is a time when you need to pick up that calculator if you're not super confident and know for sure that you can get this right. All right, so now we're going to write the selection correctly. Remember, we're going to have the letter, the equal sign, and the number. And now we have to check it. So let's see. We have y plus 2 equals -10. Whoops. Y plus 2 equals -10. I wrote 12 by accident. Now, in place of the y, we're going to put the -12. -12 plus 2, does that equal -10? Negative 12 plus 2 is negative 10 equals negative 10. Shazam. Perfection, A+. All right, the next one has a little trick to it, so I want to make sure we talk about it. Do you see, here's a different color highlighter. Do you see this beautiful negative sign? All right, so when we have a negative sign in front of a fraction, usually it's right in line with that fraction bar. Okay, technically speaking, you could slide that negative sign up to the C, or you could slide it down to the 4. Actually, the easiest way to do that is go ahead and move it down so it's with the number, so you don't have to worry about getting a negative variable when you're done. All right, so what were the steps we talked about? Find that variable. In this case, the variable is on top of fraction bar. Okay, and so what is currently happening? The C is being divided by the 4. We have to undo division with multiplication. So we are going to real quickly rewrite this. Remember I said we're going to slide this down. So let's rewrite this so that we have that negative sign on that 4. Okay, so rewrite it so it's easier for you to understand. All right, now C is being divided by negative 4. We're going to undo that by multiplying. So we're going to multiply by negative 4 on both sides. And watch, I'm going to go negative 4. I'm going to put it over 1. The negative 4 should end up next to the C. The 1 should end up next to the negative 4. Okay? And we're going to multiply times negative 4 on this side. Now, the negative 4s are going to cancel. And the reason they cancel is because they have a negative 4 on top, negative 4 on the bottom. And that's why it's important to put the 1 here. All right? So this, we end up here with C is equal to negative 32. And now we're going to check this. Now, keep in mind we had a negative sign in front, so you can use either version. So I'm going to say negative 32 over negative 4, does that equal 8? And you're welcome to use your calculator to check that. A negative divided by a negative is a positive, so 8 equals 8, and that is perfection. All right, so now let's talk about these literal equations. Literal equations. I'm not sure if you have run into these before. Literal equations have more than one variable. We also have called them formulas. So if you think back to middle school, you may have seen something like this. A equals pi r squared. Do you remember that? You had the area of a circle, and so here we have the area and we have the radius. You did all of your geometry lessons where you were finding surface area or volume. You remember you had, let's see, V equals length times width times height. Remember that one? So that's what we're talking about. Literal equations are basically like formulas that you use to do calculations. And so it's often useful to rearrange them to get a particular variable alone on one side of the equal sign. So for example, if I look at this A equals pi r squared, I might already know what the area is, and I may be looking for the radius. And so I want to really, this would be much easier to do if I just had the r all by itself. So sometimes we just rearrange that formula, okay? So here's really important detail. Solving a literal equation is just like solving a normal equation, all right? The only thing that's a little different is instead of numbers, there are variables. So you are going to have to pay close attention to what the inverse operation is. And instead of being able to look at one like this one where you probably did this math in your head, you're going to actually be forced to write down the work, which you're going to argue with me about over here. Okay, so let's take a look at how that looks. All right, so here we have x plus y equals 1. And it tells me to solve for y, which means get y alone. All right, and so right now, if we look at the equal sign, right, the x and the y are together, and we need the y to be by itself. Well, remember our steps. We look at what is happening. Let me highlight that. We look at what is happening. Y is being added to x. So to undo addition, we have to use subtraction. So we're going to subtract the x from both sides. The x's will cancel here, bring down the y, which I already did. Not sure why I typed that there. Bring down the y. I'm going to get rid of that because it's bothering me. Bring down the y equals, and take a look, 1 minus x. We just have to write it out sideways. And we're done. And it looks weird, but it's perfectly fine. All right, now let's do one more example. Solve for m. M divided by n equals p. So let's take a look at that variable. Here it is. We have to decide what is happening. M is being divided by n. So to undo division, we're going to multiply both sides by n. So multiply this side times n. You might want to put over 1 times n. The n's will cancel, just like the numbers canceled up here. And we get m is equal to p times n. And we're done. Okay? So same procedure, it just looks a little weird and you're not used to it. So don't freak out. You've got this. I believe in you, and I will see you back in class.